Hello and welcome back to class. This is Biochemistry BCH 302 for the College of Natural Health Sciences, Bermuda. My name is Dr. Delcina Bean Burrows, and this is lecture number 6. The lecture 6 objectives are, at the end of today's lecture, you will be familiar with chemical and physical injury as causes of human disease. You will also be familiar with diseases of immune origin. You will be familiar with viral diseases, and you will understand what abnormal growth cells are and their impact on health. Let's talk about chemical and physical injury. In terms of chemical injury, we will look specifically at poisoning. A poison is a substance that may cause ill health or death once ingested in little quantities. This definition excludes the multitude of substances that cause injury if ingested in giant quantities. For instance, even oxygen and glucose, so crucial to life, are virulent to cells once administered at high concentrations. There are many considerations to keep in mind when discussing poisoning. The first of these, as already suggested, is the degree of toxicity. A substance with an awfully high toxicity, such as cyanide, need be taken only in minute amounts to cause serious damage or death. A second thought is the mechanism by which the poison operates. Every poison acts at particular sites within the cell that are crucial for the upkeep of homeostasis. These sites include the genome, whose expression dictates cell structure and performance, and the cell membrane, which regulates ion transport, energy metabolism, and the synthesis of significant proteins. Every poison also has a characteristic ability to cause damage at specific sites within the body, like the liver, the kidneys, or the central nervous system. A third factor is the body's ability to eliminate the substance. Some chemicals speedily excreted in the urine must act quickly while they remain transiently within the body. Others are poorly eliminated, and thanks to this, a chronic ingestion of non-toxic amounts ends up in a build-up within the body, which will reach virulent levels. Lead poisoning could be an example of this phenomenon. The route of entry is additionally important. Several substances are harmless once ingested, but become deadly if injected into a vein. There are chemicals and medicines that are extremely reactive and act directly with an important cellular element to cause cell injury or death. Other chemicals or medication that aren't virulent intrinsically become, thus following their metabolic conversion to virulent intermediates by the host. Similarly, the chemical form of a substance affects its action on the body. Metallic mercury, as found in thermometers, is harmlessly excreted, whereas the chloride salt of the same substance is deadly. The condition of the host, the recipient of the poison that is a crucial consideration. A dose of aspirin that's harmless in an adult is also toxic to an infant. Similarly, an elderly person's tolerance of a substance is also much below that of a healthy young adult. A wide variety of poisons exist, among which some stand out as being the most usually encountered in medical practice. Some are of comparatively low toxicity, but are vital thanks to their widespread use. Several physicians consider aspirin the most dangerous poison because of its commonplace use and abuse, and because it's the leading reason behind poisoning in children. Now let's consider groups of agents, beginning with organic chemicals. Among the organic chemicals ordinarily encountered in instances of poisoning are two types of alcohol: ethyl alcohol, which is ethanol, and methyl alcohol, which is methanol. Ethyl alcohol is the kind found in most alcoholic beverages. Methyl alcohol, or methanol, is used for a range of household functions. Acute ethyl alcohol poisoning is encountered after ingestion of huge quantities over a comparatively short period of time. The alcohol is quickly absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract, and high blood levels will be achieved during a remarkably short time. Ethyl alcohol acts chiefly as a central nervous system depressant, and luckily, stupor usually results before fatal doses will be reached. The difference in blood levels between intoxication and fatal stupor is extremely slight, however, and death could result with the consumption of large quantities of alcohol from depression of the respiratory center in the brain. Methyl alcohol is typically ingested either accidentally or with self-destructive intent. Once inside the body, it is metabolized to acid, a very toxic substance that selects the nerves within the eye as its target. Without treatment, blindness results. Methyl alcohol can also have an effect on the brain tissue itself. Carbon monoxide is a non-irritating noble gas without color, taste, or odor. A poison to blame for a large number of accidental and suicidal deaths, it's one of the chemical products of any combustion of organic material. Inhalation of 1% concentration will be fatal within 10 to 20 minutes. Carbon monoxide acts as an internal asphyxiant, causing oxygen starvation of the tissues. It ought to be noted that exposure to even low concentrations may result in the slow accumulation of this poison over hours, days, or weeks, leading to very gradually to toxic or fatal levels. Now let's consider inorganic chemicals. The inorganic chemicals most commonly responsible for poisonings are cyanide, mercury, arsenic, and lead. While the last three typically appear in chemical forms that are quite harmless, it is the soluble salts of these substances that are poisons. Cyanide is a dangerous substance in any kind. It may occur in the form of hydrocyanic gas or as solid compounds like potassium cyanide. It's one of the foremost lethal poisons known. An amount of 0.2 grams administered to a 70 kilogram, which is a 154-pound human, causes death within minutes. Like carbon monoxide, it acts as a cellular asphyxiant. Mercury, in the pure metallic form, is quite harmless. However, the salt of the same substance, notably mercuric chloride, is a deadly poison. As very little as 0.1 gram is enough to cause harm to body tissues, and 2 grams will cause death in a 70 kilogram person. This agent causes extensive tissue harm where high concentrations of the poison are encountered. Once the substance is swallowed, the abdomen represents the portal of entry. The mercuric chloride is partly absorbed in the blood, and this portion is excreted through the urine. The rest affects organs within the digestive tract, principally the stomach and the colon, and therefore the kidneys. Mercuric salts cause death of cells by precipitating the proteins inside the cells, a type of cell injury known as coagulative death. With careful treatment, affected persons survive with full recovery. Chronic consumption of smaller amounts of mercuric salts, as is seen in some industrial settings, may result in disease involving the mouth, skin, and nervous system. Arsenic is contained in several things used around the house. Both odorless and tasteless compounds of arsenic are found in some rat poisons, plant sprays, paints, and other household preparations. Several of those unit staples are ingested accidentally by children. Mainly affected by arsenic are the blood vessels and the central nervous system. Vascular collapse and depression of the central nervous system will be followed by coma and death within hours after consumption. Lead. The soluble salts of inorganic lead also are strong systemic poisons. They will accumulate inside the body over a protracted period until harmful levels are reached and cell injury ensues. These salts were at one time normally found in paints, and sickness was often seen in children who chewed on their painted cribs or woodwork. Legislation in several countries has outlawed the employment of lead-based paints for infants' furnishings. Other kinds of poisoning are incurred through industrial exposure and ingestion of water from lead pipes. Lead poisoning damages red blood cells and results in hemolysis, which is the rupturing of red blood cells, with ensuing anemia. In the brain, lead accumulation causes degeneration of nerve cells. This produces such manifestations as mental depression, psychosis, convulsions, and even coma and death. If an early fatality doesn't occur, the lead is slowly excreted and complete recovery is also anticipated. Now let's consider drugs. Drugs are another vital reason for poisoning. It's a pharmacological principle that for any therapeutic gain derived from a drug, a price is paid. There are few medicines used today that don't have any side effects. That is, the effects unplanned once the drug is administered. Though these side effects could also be harmless and inconsequential, certain drugs have side effects that are potent. Similarly, a drug may be helpful in a very certain dose range, but harmful once larger doses are taken. Morphine, for instance, is a superb drug for the management of severe pain. However, it can depress respiration, and excessive amounts of it can cause death. All medicines are therefore potentially harmful. Barbiturates and salicylates are the main drugs normally found to cause serious illness from over-ingestion. Barbiturates nearly exclusively affect the central nervous system. With toxic levels, the very important centers located inside the midbrain are depressed. This results in profound coma, depression of respiration, oxygen starvation of the tissues, and even shock. The identification of barbiturate poisoning depends almost completely on finding the substance in the blood or urine, as there's very little anatomic change in tissues. Treatment is directed toward getting the drug out of the system as quickly as attainable, either by inducing copious urinary excretion of the drug or by employing the use of an artificial kidney, a system referred to as dialysis. Aspirin, or acetylsalicylic acid, is a drug that deserves special mention because it's such a standard family item and sometimes within the reach of young children. About 10 to 30 grams of aspirin is fatal in adults, and far smaller amounts is fatal in children. A single aspirin pill of normal size contains about 1/3 of a gram. There are several signs and symptoms related to salicylate poisoning, including headaches, drowsiness, dyspepsia, nausea, vomiting, sweating, and thirst. Salicylate poisoning is an acute medical emergency. Rigorous medical treatment is demanded, and use of the synthetic kidney is usually needed. Now let's consider physical injury. Physical injuries include those caused by mechanical trauma, heat and cold, electrical discharges, changes in pressure, and radiation. Mechanical trauma is an injury to any portion of the body from a blow, crush, cut, or penetrating wound. The complications of mechanical trauma are sometimes associated with fracture, hemorrhage, and infection. They do not essentially have to appear at once after occurrence of the injury. Slow internal hemorrhage might remain masked for days and result in an eventual emergency. Similarly, wound infection and even systemic infection are seldom detectable until several days after the harm. All vital mechanical injuries must so be kept under observation for days or perhaps weeks. Let's now consider diseases of immune origin. The immune system protects against communicable disease. However, it may also every now and then cause disease. Disorders of the immune system fall under two broad categories. A, those that arise once some aspect of the host immune mechanism fails to prevent infection, such as in the case of immune deficiencies, and B, those that occur once the immune response is directed at an inappropriate antigen, like a non-infectious agent in an allergic reaction, the body's own antigens in an autoimmune response, or the cells of a transplanted organ in graft rejection. When we consider immune deficiencies, it is important to recognize that the system could fail to perform for several reasons. Many immunodeficiency disorders are caused by a genetic disorder in some element of the system, and so they usually manifest early in life. Some deficiencies, however, are acquired through the action of infectious agents like viruses, through the action of immunosuppressive agents used to treat numerous medical conditions, and through the consequences of certain disease processes like cancer. Both genetic and acquired immune deficiencies suppress one or several aspects of the immune response, rendering the affected individual unable to resist infection unless treated by administration of immunoglobulin or by bone marrow transplant. Inherited immune disorders undermine the immunologic response in a variety of ways. B lymphocytes may be unable to provide antibodies. Phagocytes could also be unable to digest microbes. or specific complement elements might not be produced. Severe combined immunodeficiency, a condition that arises from many different genetic defects, disrupts the functioning of both the humoral and cell-mediated response. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS, is caused by infection with human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, that destroys a certain sort of T lymphocyte, the helper T cell. An infected individual is at risk of a range of infectious organisms, including those referred to as opportunistic pathogens, which can live benignly within the human body and cause sickness only when the immune system is suppressed. Certain diseases, such as Kaposi sarcoma and pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, which till recently were seldom encountered by clinicians, became rife in the AIDS population and are typically the cause of mortality. In terms of allergies, the immune system may react to any foreign substance and consequently it could respond to innocuous materials in the same way that it responds to infectious agents. If the foreign material poses no threat to the individual, an immune response is unnecessary, but it, all the same, could ensue. This misplaced response is termed an allergy or hypersensitivity, and therefore the foreign matter is noted as an allergen. Common allergens include spore, dust, bee venom, and numerous foods like shellfish. What causes one person and not another to develop an allergic reaction isn't fully understood. An allergic response happens in the following manner. On initial exposure to the substance, the person becomes hypersensitive to it, that is, develops antibodies and specific T cells to the allergen. An allergy doesn't typically accompany this first event. Once re-exposure happens, however, symptoms of the allergic response appear. These symptoms vary from the delicate response of sneezing and a runny nose to the sometimes serious reaction of anaphylaxis or anaphylactic shock, symptoms of which include vascular collapse and potentially fatal respiratory distress. Allergic reactions exhibit completely different symptoms depending on which immune mechanisms are accountable. On the premise of this criterion, they can be categorized into 4 varieties, the first 3 of which involve antibodies and occur during a matter of minutes or hours. Type 1 hypersensitivity, which happens directly once the hypersensitive person comes in touch once more with the allergen, is responsible for most typical allergies. The allergen reacts with antibodies attached to the surface of either of the 2 types of cells, mast cells that are scattered throughout the supporting tissues of the body, and basophilic leukocytes, which are the white blood cells that stain readily with basic dyes that circulate within the blood. The cells release numerous substances like amine, which causes dilation of blood vessels and contraction of smooth muscles within the bronchial airways, characteristic symptoms of asthma and anaphylaxis. In type 2, or cytotoxic reactions, antibodies don't seem to be bound to cells as in type 1 reaction, but circulate freely and interact with cell-bound antigens in the same way that antibodies bind to cells containing infectious agents. Complement is typically activated, resulting in cell destruction. A special category of type 2 hypersensitivity involves an immune response to certain self-proteins, antigens that belong to the host, on the surface of cells, a mechanism that underlies autoimmune disorders like autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Type 3, or immune complex, reactions are directed against soluble antigens. Circulating antibodies mix with antigens, usually not bound to the cell surface, to create an immune complex that is deposited in tissues or the walls of blood vessels. The complex attracts complement to which polymorphonuclear leukocytes are drawn. These cells then release powerful enzymes that cause inflammation and vessel injury. Immune complexes also form in autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis. Type 4 sensitivity, in contrast to the other reactions, doesn't involve antibodies, but instead is mediated by T cells. In these reactions, also referred to as delayed type because they arise in a matter of days instead of minutes or hours, T cells either activate a local inflammatory reaction, which may cause intensive tissue injury, or they will kill tissue cells directly. Chronic inflammation characteristic of many autoimmune disorders, like chronic thyroiditis, results from this reaction. With the exception of the type 1 response, all responses are seen in each allergies and autoimmune disorders. Autoimmune disorders. Immune responses can be mounted against proteins that belong to the host, giving rise to autoimmune diseases. Although the immune system naturally generates antibodies to its own cells, mechanisms exist to keep this activity in check. Two mechanisms that prevent the immune system from mounting an attack against the host's own tissues have been identified. The first involves the elimination of self-reactive lymphocytes during their development and maturation in the thymus, a lymphoid organ in the chest. Self-reactive lymphocytes present in these cell populations are destroyed when they encounter the self-antigen to which they react. Because this protective selection process is not highly efficient, some self-reactive lymphocytes survive, exit the thymus, and enter the blood and tissues. Outside the thymus, a second line of defense against immune self-destruction is afforded in which self-reactive lymphocytes lose their ability to react to self-antigens when they are encountered in blood and tissues. This state is referred to as immunologic ignorance. Autoimmune diseases arise when this mechanism fails and self-reactive lymphocytes are activated by self-antigens in the host's own tissues, often with devastating effects. Systemic lupus erythematosus, thyroiditis, insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus, and rheumatoid arthritis are examples of this type of disorder. Graft rejection. Transplantation of organs and cells from one individual to another has become an important medical treatment. As are other forms of therapy, it is accompanied by certain risks. Each individual's cells have a spectrum of genetically determined cell surface protein antigens. The major histocompatibility complex, MHC antigens, or human leukocyte antigens, as they are referred to in humans. MHC antigens determine a person's tissue type, just as red blood cell antigens determine blood type. There are two classes of MHC antigens: Class I molecules, encoded by 3 genes, and class 2 molecules encoded by 4 possible sets of genes. Each of these genes has many alternative forms, and thus the probability of any 2 individuals, aside from siblings, especially identical twins, having the same form of each gene is extremely small. Even parents will have different tissue antigens from their children. These differences in tissue antigens pose an obstacle to transplantation because it is highly likely that foreign donor tissue will introduce antigens in the recipient that will trigger an immune response, leading to tissue death and rejection. However, by careful matching of the MHC type of donor and recipient, rejection can be diminished or avoided. Because perfect matching is possible only between identical twins or very close relatives, many transplants occur between less closely matched tissue types, and success is achieved with the administration of powerful immunosuppressive drugs. Viral diseases. Of the numerous existing viruses, a few are of great importance as causes of human illness. They're responsible for such diseases as variola, poliomyelitis inflammation, influenza, yellow fever, measles, and infectious disease and such minor disorders as warts and also the common cold, not to mention the coronavirus. Viruses might survive for some time in the soil, in water, or in milk. However, they can't multiply unless they invade or parasitize living cells. Certain viruses proliferate among the host cells and accumulate in sufficient number to cause rupture and death of the cells. Others multiply among the cell body and compete within the host for nutrition or important constituents of cells' metabolism. Both varieties of viruses are said to be cytotoxic. Viral agents, notably those capable of manufacturing tumors in humans and lower animals, flourish inside cells and stimulate the cells to activate growth. These viruses are referred to as oncogenic, which means tumor-producing. The quantity of oncogenic viruses that cause tumors in lower animals is large. In humans, many DNA viruses and one RNA virus are strongly involved in the introduction of a range of tumors. Most viral infections occur in childhood. This age distribution has been explained in immunological grounds. Viruses typically induce a firm and enduring immunity. On initial exposure to a virus, children might or might not contract the disease, depending on their resistance, the size of the infective dose of virus, and many other variables. Those that contract the disease, as well as people who resist the infection, develop a permanent immunity to any further exposure. By either pathway, as children get older, they increasingly gather protection against viral infections. Consequently, the incidence of these infections falls in adulthood and later life. The frequency of the common cold is explained on the grounds that a bunch of different viral agents all induce similar respiratory infections, and while one attack confers immunity against the particular responsible agent, it provides no protection against the rest. Viral diseases are resistant to antibiotics and other antimicrobial agents. This point is made due to a distressing tendency among people to take penicillin or another antibiotic for a common cold. Rickettsial diseases. Human rickettsial diseases are caused by microorganisms that fall between viruses and bacteria in size. These minute agents are barely visible beneath the standard microscope. Like viruses, they multiply solely within the cells of inclined hosts. They are found in nature in a variety of ticks and lice, and once transmitted to humans by the bite of one of these arthropods, they typically cause acute febrile diseases, most of which are characterized by skin rashes. Rocky Mountain rickettsiosis, a general rickettsial infection, invades and kills the cells lining blood vessels and causes hemorrhage, inflammation, blood clots, and extensive tissue death. If untreated, it is fatal in about 20 to 30% of cases. Bacterial diseases. The diseases produced by bacteria are the most common of infectious biotic diseases. They vary from trivial skin infections to such devastating disorders as bubonic plague and tuberculosis. Numerous forms of pneumonia, infections of cerebrospinal fluid, the liver and the kidneys, and the sexually transmitted diseases such as syphilis and gonorrhea are all kinds of bacterial infection. All bacteria induce disease by one of three methods. A, the production of an exotoxin, a harmful chemical substance that is secreted or excreted by the bacterium, as in food poisoning caused by Clostridium botulinum. B, the elaboration of a toxin, a harmful chemical substance that's liberated only after disintegration of the microorganism, as in typhoid caused by Salmonella typhi. Or C, the induction of sensitivity within the host to antigenic properties of bacterial organism, as in the case of tuberculosis, after sensitization to Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Now let's consider the abnormal growth of cells. Cancer cells. The growth of cells within the body is a closely controlled function which, together with restricted and controlled expression of various genes, gives rise to the many different tissues that constitute the total organism. For the most part, management of cell growth persists throughout life, except for episodic instances like healing of an injured tissue. During this scenario, the growth of a localized cluster of cells is accelerated to restructure the tissue to its previous state of normal structure and function following that tightly regulated growth resumes. Such areas of increased cell growth are referred to as hyperplasia. They include expanded numbers of normal appearing cells and, depending on the period of growth, may result in an enlargement of tissues and organs. In general, hyperplasia arise to meet special needs of the body and subside once these needs are met. Hyperplasia are the results of the sustained impact over time of stimulatory influences along with a loss of growth-inhibiting factors that are usually found inside or around cells. As long as the loss of inhibition of cell growth is temporary, the capability for increased cell proliferation when necessary has obvious benefits. However, if cells permanently lose their ability to respond to growth inhibitory factors, their growth becomes uncontrolled and cancer may result. Now let's discuss neoplasms, malignant and benign tumors. Diseases arising from uncontrolled cell growth and behavior jointly constitute the second commonest cause of death, the most common cause being heart disease. Cancers, the most important kind of abnormal growth and behavior, were responsible for 538,000 deaths, or almost 1/4 of all deaths within the U.S. in 1994. The significance of this incidence is placed in correct perspective by a consideration of subsequent facts. While cancer arises at all stages of life, its incidence, which is the number of cases, will increase with age, reaching a peak between 55 and 74 years. This fact, along with the increasing longevity of the overall population and improved diagnostic modalities that enable clinicians to observe cancers with greater frequency, tempers the notion that the incidence of cancer is increasing. In addition to cancers, malignant tumors that may eventually kill the host, there are benign tumors that seldom produce serious disease. The two types of tumors are jointly referred to as neoplasms, which means new growths, and their study is known as oncology. Tumors are said as being either malignant or benign based on the structure and functional properties of their cell elements and biological behavior. The cells and tissues of malignant tumors differ from the tissues from that they arise. They exhibit a lot of rapid growth and altered structure and function, as well as stimulation of new blood vessel growth. This is known as angiogenesis, and a capacity to invade adjacent normal tissues, enter the blood vascular system, and spread. They metastasize to different sites. The properties of malignant tumor cells serve to boost and support their proliferation and extension throughout the body tissues and organs, eventually resulting in death of the host. In contrast, the cells and tissues of benign tumors tend to grow slowly and generally closely resemble their normal tissues of origin. Once the structure and function of benign tumor cells are morphologically and functionally indistinguishable from those of normal cells, their growth as tumor mass is the sole feature indicative of their neoplastic nature. It is hoped that a larger understanding of malignant cell growth and behavior can result in the development of novel cancer therapies based on neoplasm cell biology that may complement or replace the present treatments of surgical extirpation, complete excision, chemotherapy, and radiation. Okay, so we've reached the end of today's lecture, and for assignment number 6, I'd like for you, in an essay of no less than 200 words, provide a definition for chemical and physical injuries, list examples of viral diseases, list examples of disease of immune origin, describe the differences between benign and malignant tumors, and state how gaining a better understanding of neoplasm cell biology can impact cancer treatment. And as always, if you have any difficulty at all with this assignment, you may shoot me an email or a text message. My office hours are on Thursdays from 4 to 6 p.m. And with that, do have a great week.